Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. In today's episode, we will be breaking down the season finale, episode 10 of The Agency, the first season of The Agency, definitely coming back for a second season, by the way. An episode called Overtaken by Events. Indeed, everyone is overtaken by events in this episode of the show. And of course, we are covering this, putting this episode, this recap out ahead of our subsequent, probably within the next day or so, recap of episode 2 of season 2 of Severance, a really interesting episode of TV. Did you have a chance to watch this as well?
I haven't seen it yet. It's on my list for later today. But in the time since the last episode and today, I'm beginning to rethink my stance on Helly. I don't know if this episode will affect it, but I don't know. I'm beginning to wonder about the Helly stuff.
Yeah, we could save that for that conversation. There
Yeah.
is, you really have to watch this episode before you can make any kind of.
Okay, then. I wanted to put a pin in it that
Yes.
I am rethinking my stance on Helly because I want it declared that I had second thoughts even before I see this episode in case
In case, yes.
in case what I said last week was wrong.
You'll see. I don't want to spoil anything, but
Okay.
a very interesting episode of the show. So everybody who hasn't caught up on it yet, definitely check that out. And we will be discussing it shortly here in the feed. So maybe very shortly in the feed. What depends on when I publish all these episodes. Yeah, in this episode, Overtaken by Events, which I love that terminology of, as if they're saying, well, our plan's been overtaken by events, which is, I think, thematically very important in this particular episode. The very concept that this is all happening according to plan, and then someone actually saying, well, we've been overtaken by the events of the day, which maybe is happening all the time. And this is just all a facade that they have as much control as they think they do.
Yeah, were all of the episode titles exact quotes from the episodes? I can't remember now.
I don't know if that's the case. I'm looking through the list here. Last week was the Rubicon, and there was a reference to the Rubicon in the episode. But Spy for Sale, for example, that happens in the episode, right, where they actually have the Vespa for sale on that website. But I don't think anyone ever says that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm just scrolling through here. Yeah, definitely not. Hawk
Okay.
from a handsaw. I don't think that was referenced in the episode,
Mm.
but maybe it was. Just in episode 8, as an example, "Truth Will Set You Free" is something that we discovered is actually inscribed on the outside of the CIA building in Langley, Virginia. But I do not believe anybody in that episode says it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
So Sona, the Academy Award nominations were announced yesterday. Finally, this has been delayed for weeks because of the California fires. Have finally got those 2 large fires almost completely contained. And then within hours, they had this giant fire breakout, a new one, which now they just barely have contained itself. So it's just incredible what's going on out there. But because of all the delays, finally, we have those Academy Award nominations. I know you haven't seen a lot of those films. I was curious, given what you heard about the nominations or some of these end of the year films and the conversations around them, is there anything you are particularly planning to catch up with?
I feel like I have been so removed from seeing anything but children's movies lately
Yes.
that I really have no idea what is going on out there. I'm kind of interested in the substance based on just what I've
Yes.
been
I figured
hearing
you'd say
about
that one.
it. Yeah, but I don't know. I couldn't even name many other nominees at this point. I'm pretty ignorant on
You're not a
movies.
Bob Dylan fan, I assume.
Right, I did know that was out there. I'm not particularly interested in it though.
Yes. Timothy Chalamet is very good in that film. I think the film is pretty generic as a biopic, but very well made. The evocation of 1950s New York is really incredible, just from a design standpoint, and a great performance from Timothy Chalamet, not just in learning how to play guitar and imitating the voice, but actually in inhabiting the character. But I thought it's pretty generic, but not an embarrassment or anything like that. Man, Emilia Perez is nominated for 14 Academy Awards. That movie is absolutely horrible, and it will probably
Really
win Best Picture. And it is awful,
interesting.
like truly awful.
Hmm.
Although it has some interesting aspects to it, but I'll save that for a whole other conversation. Yeah, I thought the Demi Moore film, The Substance, really shocking to me that film, I'm happy to see that it has all these nominations, and she may very well win Best Actress as kind of a career capstone for her. And she's incredible in that film. Margaret Qualley was not nominated, but really should have been. It's really a two-woman performance. They kind of share the lead role, but she has a very long career ahead of her, obviously, and very talented. But it's just the fact that this is nominated for Best Picture is pretty shocking, considering how this is not a traditional Oscar type film. Its tone is so over the top and zany and energetic, basically the exact opposite of something like A Complete Unknown, which is very familiar to traditional Academy Award winner nominees. So glad to see them nominated. Glad to see that they're including these type of outside of the box films. And maybe they were trying to do that with Emilia Perez, but man, that movie is terrible. Truly terrible. We will see how it all goes. It'll probably win because it's bad. That's my general opinion of the Academy Awards. This is my rule of thumb for the Academy Awards, by the way. Go back and look at whatever won Best Original Screenplay in its particular year. For example, Get Out won Best Original Screenplay. Fargo won Best Original Screenplay. Pulp Fiction won Best Original Screenplay. None of those films win Best Picture, but the Academy Awards, the real Best Picture of the year is the film that won Best Original Screenplay. So we'll see who that is this year. I don't take these Academy Awards very seriously. It's good for the films because it makes them get seen by a much larger audience. So I'm happy when something I like gets nominated because it increases its profile. But I don't even watch the Academy Awards anymore. They're pretty ridiculous at this point. Anyway, that digression out of the way. I figured you weren't too tuned into it, but I would have put money down that you were going to say The Substance would be the one that would have probably resonated with you.
I'm so predictable.
Well, I mean, the whole Demi Moore connection and this kind of exploration of these type of feminist topics I thought would be interesting. Although I don't know if you like the film, by the way. That's my only caveat there.
Interesting.
Because of its, way over the top style. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Overtaken by Events. What did you think about the structure of this episode where there's like a ticking clock within a ticking clock, right? We kick things off with a truly shocking accident. We discover right away.
I gasped.
It just totally taken by surprise. Of all the ways that I thought he was going to end up in that emergency room, and indeed he is in a hospital, although we thought he might have been captured by somebody or something earlier on in previous recaps, that he's just in a hospital. He's been hit by a motorcycle. I mean, he's been hit by a car when he was riding his motorcycle. And he had just totally shocking. And then, of course, we know that based on the conversation with Owen, that things are not going to plan with the Felix extraction. And then he's taken off the board completely. So just a shocking turn of events.
First of all, he got hit by the car. I gasped. Then I rewound to see if I could see anyone running out of the car or if I could see who the driver was. So all of that, very exciting for me. However, the counterpart to that is I think it's kind of anticlimactic that that's how he ended up in the hospital, because we were imagining something so much more dramatic as far as how he ended up in the hospital than he got hit by a car. Although in the end, it was dramatic, but it didn't seem that way for most of the episode. So I guess it was a little bit of a roller coaster there, but I am a big fan of the 6 hours previously. I like that when, I like that story construction of seeing everything that led up to this bizarre event. So I did enjoy that.
Yeah, it just completely took me off, balance, and in a good way, thinking to myself, this is the season finale. Like, they take him off the board. Like, what are they going to do here? And obviously all these storylines are culminating at the same time, and they just remove him from the plot, which of course you assume he's going to be the one who's going to be driving all the plot in that episode. So I really liked having my expectations kind of subverted there. And then we rewind the clock to see what led to this moment. And I agree 100% with what you were saying as far as how anticlimactic. We know he's not going to die. We've seen him in these flash forwards. So he's definitely not going. We're not going to be like, oh my God, they're going to get rid of the actor. We already know that's not the case. So there's not much drama there. But then it does end up being truly a fascinating plot setup there, because we discover over the course of the episode, and maybe we'll just start with his particular plot line, that Martian gets approached by Richardson, the British agent. This is after he discovers that there's a report on Samia's situation from Naomi. Naomi doesn't realize that Henry hasn't briefed him on it yet. He's desperate to rescue her in some way. He tries to make an approach to that Sudanese
Sudan, yeah.
representative and makes an appeal to him. And they're saying, like, who's this guy? He's this drunk. He's a drug addict or whatever they call him out as, basically saying he's been left behind by the negotiators because he's so inconsequential. He's not really a good asset for us. I've been wondering all season long, what is Richardson's play? Why does he have a finger in every pie, like with the Sudanese, with the Chinese, with everything that's going on, and subverting Martian? And it's so funny. It's such an obvious turn that I didn't even see it coming. But the whole play has been to bring Martian in as a double agent, right? So what did you think about this?
Is that
revelation?
obvious though? Because I am not super well versed on spy dynamics,
Mhm.
but it just seemed to me that it would be surprising that he would be a double agent in this way.
Well, I mean, that's the button on the episode, right? Is that you hear Richardson's voice saying that all he needs to do, he's just going to go about his
Oh
work the
yeah, yeah,
regular
yeah.
way.
No,
Yeah.
that's what's happening. Oh, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely what's happening. But when I think of being a double agent, I think of, for Russia or,
Right.
something
Mhm.
like that. Not something like where we kind of are ostensibly allies generally, right?
Supposedly, yeah.
So,
Supposedly, exactly. I mean, that's the fascinating element of it, is in Martian's reaction to this proposal, because he seems really disturbed, maybe just because he doesn't want to be compromised. Obviously, nobody does. But you're absolutely correct. If he's a double agent for Britain, it doesn't seem like it would be necessarily something that even needs to be undercover in a way, right? He could probably be more open about it, and just you could just say, hey, I want you to pressure the higher ups into bringing me, Richardson, that is, into these conversations more, or something like that. You can almost do it in the open if you wanted to. So the fact that he's like, nope, I want you to keep this all a secret until I need you, it makes it feel like, and I guess this potentially is the setup for season 2, that there is some larger plot machinations going on, and that Richardson's ahead of everybody in that particular regard. I do agree, though, that like the final moments are utterly chilling, but
mhm.
should they be? Why are we so worried about Britain
Well,
working against
yeah,
us? Yeah.
that's where I thought exactly. That's where I thought it was my lack of experience with, I don't know, international politics, spy dynamics. I'm not sure where I thought my failing was, but like, yeah, it seems super intense. And then at the same time, it's like, but I thought we get along since the Revolutionary War, no? So I don't know.
That was the last time we really had odds with each other. It feels like almost like Richardson could be more dangerous because maybe he has a private agenda more so than the British government, which I honestly think that the position that Richardson presents to Bosco earlier on in the season, where he's like, hey, the politics of the Middle East, that's America's situation now. We're just here to blow on the dice and like wish you good luck and pat you on the back. That is my general impression of what the intelligence agencies of the UK are at the current state. So I don't think that they would necessarily need a double agent, right, in this particular regard. But I guess we'll know more next season.
For sure. I mean, it was beautifully set up for the next season.
This is pretty nefarious when you think about it. Not only has he compromised Martian here, we find out his name, by the way, his actual name is Brandon Colby. Is that his actual name?
Yes,
Cody or
I
Colby?
noticed too that they gave his real name. I think it was Colby.
Yeah, when his daughter shows up at the end of the episode, it's not only that he's been compromised, Richardson is manipulating him in this way. It seems pretty overtly that he orchestrated this car accident as well, right?
Yes, but you're jumping ahead, right?
Yeah.
But I agree with that because I want to talk about the end of that scene where Richardson is first proposing being a double agent.
Yeah.
And Martian agrees to it, right?
Right. Right.
Because it's like this, the clock is ticking. As you said, the whole episode has this feeling the clock is ticking, and he only has a limited amount of time to save Samia. And then the end is Richardson being like, just pulling your leg, but good to know you would do that.
Right. I mean, I think that's just psychological games there. I like how he calls him a piece of shit. He goes, "Oh, everybody calls
Yeah.
me a piece of shit."
Yeah, that's the third time this week or something like that, right?
Exactly. It's such a mind game he's playing with him, right?
It's
Because
such a mind game. Yes.
he's like, "Oh, that's not what I intended." Well, but good to know. And then
Right.
obviously he not only then puts the screws to him later on again, more forcefully trying to entrap him into something that he already offered himself, but then he
Yes.
orchestrates this whole thing where he has the car accident and then
It's the exact word I was going to use. The orchestration of all
yeah,
of this is insane to me.
think about what additionally is going on there. It's as if he wasn't okay to have his almost like handshake agreement to it, because the thing that we do not see at all in this episode, but we have seen throughout this entire season of the show, is Martian being interviewed by this female agent who had a British accent, and we never see her face. Now we never actually see her face. I thought we were going to have that reveal here in this particular episode, but importantly, it wasn't Richardson that was questioning him that whole entire time. There was this
Right.
agent there. The reason I mention this is that he's getting everything, the whole entire story, all the subterfuge and lies that he's been telling to the agency as part of this relationship with Samia. So that's all on the record to this other agent. So obviously Richardson now has this on the record. So this is the way he is going to make sure that it's not just a handshake deal, that Martian has to, comply, because his neck's on the line there with this confession that he's made throughout the course of the season. This also,
Yeah.
interestingly, outside the scope of the show, means that Samia is not quite out of the storyline.
True. As far as we know, she's still alive at that moment in time. And I did like Richardson's kind of offhand comment of like, of course, we've been bugging the lounge at the Ritz-Carlton for years. Everybody knows that. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, all these foreign dignitaries all go through there, right? So they're just
Yeah.
listening in on everything.
hmm
Meanwhile, back at the office, Bosco, he's telling Owen to be in the room. He's the one who knows who Coyote is and what he looks like. So they want to be able to identify him. I like how Bosco mentions the fact that once Strategic Air Command shows up, he says that their job is to just ask how many sugars do you want in your coffee or whatever it was.
hmm
And of course, the joke to this that pays off later is when you see SAC officers, running the operation, and Owen walks in and he's like, "I'm just here to identify Coyote. I got to keep my mouth shut." And then Henry shows up later. "I'm just in the back of the room observing." And then Bosco shows up and he's like, "Oh no, another one of these guys."
Well, and also the point that one of those guys asked Owen, well, what should we do now?
Right.
Right. And kind of like with a sarcastic tone of voice. And that's when Owen steps out to call Martian.
Yeah, and this, of course, is the moment where he gets hit by the car.
Yeah.
So I started with that axe. I wanted to start with like Martian's storyline to kind of get some context to a lot of these other things that are happening, because the fact that Martian is taken off the board at that very moment, literally, he's on the phone with Owen, and luckily everybody's able to improvise across the board. This is like basically
Yeah.
FUBAR at one point, but then are able to pull it off, which I think is very interesting thematically. We have to talk about that in greater detail. I think that's in a large part the theme of the whole entire show. Owen is on the phone with Martian, and that's the moment when Martian gets knocked off the bicycle. You could imagine there's a lot of ways that the British agency could have taken him out, just had him be in a room, or just pressured him to say, "We can get Sammy out. We have people in position right now. You just have to disappear for the next hour." So there's ways they could have handled this differently. But the fact that this seems to be coordinated in a way to mess up that operation. Don't you think that's the intention?
Who is they?
The British agents, like taking Martian out at that moment potentially endangers this particular mission.
Interesting. I hadn't connected those two things. I thought it was just a coincidence of timing, and that they wanted to capitalize on what they learned about what Martian is willing to agree to for Samia, and that the clock is ticking on her. I hadn't connected it with the Ukraine stuff, but maybe so.
I mean, you might be right also that their only concern was the negotiation with the Chinese, but then it seems kind of extreme to take Martian out in the way that they did, right? They could have had a
It is an
conversation with him
extreme
over.
thing to do.
They could have just invited him into the coffee house and had, negotiated something with him, you would think.
Fair. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted him unconscious for the next few hours, right? Exactly when this operation is taking place.
I'm trying to recall Richardson's prior involvement in the comments he made in connection with the Russia-Ukraine stuff, but I'm unfortunately drawing a blank as we sit here.
That's why I'm curious about that particular timing of all that. I don't think that there has been a lot of talk about the Russian and Ukrainian situation. The conversation definitely has been more about those negotiations over the access to the ports there off the coast of Sudan. But like I said, that timing, a coincidence, and so like it's not only that they wanted to pretend to mug him in the street and knock him out for a little while. I mean, they put him in the hospital for a day. He was completely out of commission at exactly the moment when they needed him to help in the Ukraine. Before we get to that centerpiece moment, which of course is probably the entire third of the central third of the episode, that whole mission and how insane all those different moving parts are. But before we get to that whole thing, I did want to talk about another interaction. This is before, obviously, the bike accident that Martian has with Naomi. There's obviously the conversation where Naomi tells him about Samia's situation and that there's a report on it. But also there is this whole idea about parenting, this conversation in the elevator where Naomi says, I've been worried. I didn't get my email, which of course, when the email comes, it goes, Mom, everything's fine. So it's funny about this, once again, talking about parenting, that she says, I feel like this worried mother sending my daughter away. And Martian goes, oh, you sent her away to Tehran to infiltrate the Iranian nuclear program? Well, yeah, you are a bad parent. I thought that was not only funny, but I think it does tie into the themes here of the show, once again, about these mentoring these people who supposedly are going to put their jobs above and their loyalty to these people, theoretically, above their own personal outcomes and their own personal relationships, and whether this is all a fool's errand to start with.
Even before Naomi said that she felt like a bad parent, the way she was conveying her concern already made me think of parenting.
Right.
So I think it's a very apt analogy here. This is a conversation for later. I do think maybe they're overestimating Danny, and their confidence in her might be a little bit misplaced. I have been neutral on the Naomi character until this episode, but in this particular episode, I really liked her.
I like Catherine Waterston in general, and I liked her in this performance as well. And I think that she's conveying something there where there is this soft concern. Maybe this is what's interesting about how you see a lot of even Martian's facade cracking over the course of the last couple of episodes. I think that she also, when she's with Danny, she has a certain facade. She's the tough agent. She's really, in a lot of ways, imitating Martian's cold exterior. But when you see her casually talking to Martian, she is a marshmallow, right? So I think that her version of herself, when she's talking to Owen, when she's talking to Martian, when she's watching those conversations between herself and Martian, there's a real softness to her, which she does not convey. She's tough as nails with Danny, but that's honestly because she's trying to prepare her for the worst, right? So it is an interesting metaphor for parenting in a way. I don't parent that way, to be honest. I'm pretty transparent with my daughter. I understand that there are many parents who do feel that way. Like, I'm just toughening you up for the world. The outside world is a tough place. And I mean, for these agents, it absolutely is, of course.
It can be very grim. And I think we even see later in this episode that some of what Naomi said could happen does happen.
Yeah, I wanted to, maybe we just close the loop on that part of the episode and then circle back to all the kind of final points and how that sets up the next season. Just to continue along those lines, you have Danny in Tehran being aggressively questioned
by a guy with a pot plant necklace. I am surprised that's even allowed to be worn with the uniform.
Yeah, I just watched a movie about the current circumstance in Iran. And I don't know if that is, maybe it is. I don't know if marijuana is like available recreationally there now. Don't know enough about it. But that was the whole interaction was interesting. Although maybe she was reading on him that this was all an act on his part. Maybe she suss that out. I did find her reaction to questioning interesting, given what we saw her do the first time she was trained. You said that she may not be ready. Maybe she isn't. But in this particular case, I felt like she learned a lesson where she was so tough when she got questioned by that other agent who eventually becomes her boyfriend. In that interaction, she constantly was saying, like, call the embassy. Where's my family? Like she was maybe a little too hard rather than, maybe how someone would actually react. So seeing her break down, I was like, I think she's learned her lesson that, that is how people would react. As a matter of fact, I think on the podcast, you explicitly said that like you would probably just have fallen apart. So I'm like, yeah, that's probably what a student would do in this circumstance.
To me, the jury's out for me on whether she was actually crying or pretending to be crying.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, do you have a read one way or the other on that? Maybe a little of both.
Honestly, that is how I read it, that she was actually crying, but strategically, right? That
playing it up. Yeah.
Right. Because she has learned her lesson that being really, really hard is only going to get her beat up, basically. Whereas if she just starts crying like an average Joe in this situation would, that might be the easiest way to get out of there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Also, my idea about Danny's maybe not being ready is actually based on my personal disappointment that I think she really did have a crush on that guy she was hooking up with.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And I wanted it to be more like just about sex and getting your frustration or energy out or whatever. But by this episode, I'm convinced, even though it didn't come up in this episode, it was addressed in the last one, I think, that she really did have a little crush on him. And that disappointed me for some reason. I wanted her to be tougher than that.
I think that is the point. It is very easy to over and over again be Naomi telling her no emotions. And then afterwards, she's like, I'm so worried about her. And then her being like, no emotions, it's just sex. But then she is actually crushing on this guy and being no emotions. But then maybe she is partially actually breaking down and crying there at the end. And to that point, maybe all of that is required for the job. I think that is what the show is kind of exploring, that it's impossible to actually separate the emotional from the strategic, and that maybe that is part of how these operations work, right? And maybe that is why we get the chaos that all works out perfectly for them in the center of this episode.
Maybe, but I do think they're giving us at least one example of the other end of the spectrum with the other woman whose name I can never remember, who hooks up in the supply closet.
Blair and Owen, yeah.
Blair, because that Russian secretary, she could care less what happened to her.
Right. I know. Yes.
I mean, the psychologist was horrified, right?
Right.
But she was just like, that's the job, lady.
That's what happens. That's what happens. You lay down with dogs, you get fleas. That's what happens. Or you end up dead.
And then with Owen in this episode, right? No softness, just like, yeah, okay, we can hook up, but that's it.
Yeah, that's a good thing that you brought that up. I forgot to note that, but I thought it was very funny where he makes that approach and says,
yes, it was cute.
We should get a drink. And then she's just like, this is a really bad time. He's like, hey, if I'm waiting for a good time, you'll be married and have kids by the time I asked you out. And then, I like the post-it note at like when they're finally successful and they're all patting each other on the back. She's like, meet me in a supply closet.
It was very cute. Love it.
Yeah, all of that was very good character work. And you really like these secondary characters. Once again, I think this show is so well cast. In the French show, which I have not watched, but I'm probably going to watch it between seasons here, at least the first season, to see how it varies. I don't know if I want to watch very deeply into it in case these storylines do continue to parallel. I don't necessarily want to spoil this show, but I'll probably watch season 1. But in the French show, I've heard by reputation that over the course of its run, different characters come to the fore and become the central characters for whole seasons or for parts of seasons. And I think that's why you cast this so well, is to have a very deep bench when you need some of these characters to take the lead. And it's paying off really well. I'm so far very much enjoying the show. Okay, let's get to this incredibly tense and really well executed central sequence here. And of course, it's been culminating for weeks now. So once again, it does feel like some of the questions I had last week about is this all happening at the same time? The original mission for Felix to assassinate this Russian military leader. And I guess it's a coincidence that Volchok has been redirected here, but this is just how things have just happened to work out, that they have redirected Volchok to this location so that Felix can be there to coordinate this assault. But it's not like those three guys are going to actually they actually have a huge squad of military people there. And I guess the Felix crew has become kind of secondary to this whole thing. Meanwhile, this Russian general, I don't know if it was their original target or just happens to be another one who's there to congratulate Volchok. So they know he's arriving. They're in communication with each other. Anyway, this is all happening at once. Some of the plotting here seems a little odd to me, considering that this seemed to be thrown together. Redirecting Volchok happened just last week. And now it seems that Volchok and the Russian general are in communication and planning to coordinate their arrival at this place. So regardless of all those accidents that occurred, we get to this point. And of course, as is to be expected with this plotting, that something's going to go wrong because the Russian general's arriving. We have one of the doctors, Sasha, this Ukrainian, who's not on board with giving up on the original plan.
Disgruntled.
Yeah, to say the least. And there's that moment, right? He goes into the bathroom. He pulls the gun out from where he's had it hidden.
Why is the gun always in the toilet tank?
And why don't the Russian army, why don't they check the toilet tank beforehand? It's always in the toilet tank, everybody. We've all seen The Godfather.
Mafia movies, exactly. It's all, even I know
where it goes, right? It's always in the toilet tank. What if somebody gets mad at one of their coworkers and wants to do an upper decker and they pick up the list and they say, oh my God, look, there's the gun. In their defense, the gun could have been hidden away somewhere else. And it could be that he has hidden the gun there like within the last 5 minutes, right? He just moved it to the toilet tank. But if he just had it there the whole entire time, I can imagine going over there, lifting up the lid and being like, where's my gun? Someone took my gun. Someone found it like months ago. Tucks in his waistband. And at one moment you're thinking like, well, maybe he's not actually going to go through with it. But he does. Of course, this is actually very cool that, he knows the guy's wearing his body armor, and he goes right into the body armor, and it's but basically into the side of his body. And like, that's not a good place to get shot, by the way, through the lung, through the heart, not a good place to get shot. And things get even worse from there. Of course, really bad for Sasha, runs away, doesn't make it very far, gets shot immediately, to the fact that this Felix operation was basically a suicide mission. But then, of course, his brothers in arms, they're like, hey, your doctors, help this guy out, get him onto the plane. And while they're going through the plane, one of them grabs a grenade from one of the soldiers who's in there and leaves it behind. And as the helicopter takes off, it detonates. And of course, this is total chaos. They are overtaken by events. Nobody knows what's going on at this moment. It's definitely not coordinated.
So exciting to watch.
It was so thrilling, yeah. And that nobody knows. It's just total chaos. They're like, what's happening now? What is that? Yeah. Why is there fire? What's going on? Everyone's just confused.
I'm a person that often, to be honest, gets distracted during action sequences because I kind of feel like, I have some general idea of how this is going to play out. Right. I don't really need the minutia of it because that's just not my interest. But here I was riveted to every second of what they were showing us.
This is my big complaint with action sequences nowadays. Like in Marvel movies, there's always like a giant half-hour action sequence at the end. And I just tune out for the whole thing because there's no consequences, right? You know that none of these people are going to die. You know that the good guys are going to win, the bad guys are going to lose, other than maybe a couple of fun choreography things or whatever. Most of it, I just tune out. And I think that's a huge problem with action nowadays, that it's just inconsequential. But to your point, if you have real stakes, like I have no idea what's going to happen at the end of this situation. So I don't know who's going to live and who's going to die, right? Everything is, so that's how you keep people invested. When you don't know what the outcome could possibly be, you definitely are vested in the events. It's like watching sports, right? You don't know who's going to win or lose, right? You got to watch. Yeah, so the helicopter gets blown up. Volchok at that moment has stopped his approach. He's a little too far outside of range from where they're stationed. They don't know whether they should advance. Volchok sees the explosion and he's like, oh, they're being attacked. We need to help. And then, of course, continues the moving forward. And then, of course, they swarm them and massacre everybody and rescue Coyote. Once again, I find it very funny that they needed to have Coyote come out to urinate.
Hmm.
so that they could confirm as if they wouldn't have done something. I mean, what would they have done at that moment if they hadn't confirmation on Coyote? They still would have gone in, I would have assumed, right? They just want to make Owen feel a little more useful than he really was in that
I
whole
guess.
situation.
Yeah.
Don't kill that guy. That's basically what they have to say. The guy you assumed was the person we're trying to get, who's not in military fatigues, that guy. Don't kill him.
I mean, I have to say, before I saw the full extent of it and I just saw the convoy, I thought there is no way they are so outnumbered. This isn't going to work. And
Right.
like, and then they just kept coming out of the
Right.
foliage.
That was funny too, the way that they set that up, much more suspenseful when they were saying that there's so many people in this convoy. When they say that at the beginning of the episode, I'm like, oh my God, Felix is going to get killed. Like these three guys,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were like, it's a suicide mission to assassinate one guy with whoever is his entourage. Well, these guys have hundreds of soldiers with them, or at least 100. These guys are so dead. But then, of course, you have like, no, they actually dropped in, like 100 of the American
Yeah.
soldiers to massacre them. So it was like, oh, there you go. No problem there at all. Although those Felix guys did a pretty good job in that really thrilling episode too, right? Back in the second episode when they
Yes, I
busted out.
I was remembering that as I watched this. Yes, like I mean that was kind of superhuman what they did
Yeah.
in that second or third episode, whichever it was. That did suffer from my lack of attention span for action sequences. I remember being very impressed by it, but also kind of being like, yeah, okay, that was good. Whereas
Well,
here I was really riveted.
yeah. Well, I mean, at that point, you didn't really care about
True.
Dr. Cheekbones. So do you think we're going to see more of Charlie in next season? I mean, I think he's a fan favorite, by the way. We've gotten commentary from multiple listeners that are like, I can't wait for Charlie to come back either.
I hope
So
so. I
maybe they'll
hope
have
people
to bring
are
him back for
reading.
next
Yeah.
season. Hey, they have a different mission. I'm sure they can have him extract Sammy or something going there. It could be
He's
Doctors
very
Without
skilled.
Borders to check on political prisoners or something. Before we move past that, really, like, once again, just incredibly well executed, those
Yeah.
sequences there in the middle. Neil Berger, by the way, once again, was directing. And I think I mentioned to you before, he directed a bunch of stuff, a lot of TV, but he's also directed the Divergent movies. There was like this knockoff Hunger Games series called Divergent that didn't really do that well.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
But he did direct those films, which were big budget sci-fi films. So when I saw him directing last week's episode, I'm like, ooh, there's going to be a lot of action. That's why they brought him in for this. And there wasn't action in that episode, but there definitely was action here. So I'm sure they probably wanted someone that had some experience with the larger type action sequences. And well directed, I thought, here as well. Before we move past all of that, I thought some of the thematics here are really interesting. The whole idea that they're overwhelmed by the events of the day, even with all of this planning, that in the end, how much of this worked out to plan and how much of it was, of course, these well-trained soldiers just reacting in the moment correctly and successfully. But I don't think this was on anyone's drawing board, and somehow it did just work out. And I'm sure in retrospect, you see it already starting to happen here at the end of the episode, that there's a lot of back padding, even when Martian shows up, like, you set up this whole thing, the crystal ball mission, and it worked perfectly. But
Hmm.
did it work perfectly, or did they just get lucky? And isn't that kind of what we're seeing in this show over and over again? Retroactively, you say that, oh, this thing went wrong because this person screwed up or because this unforeseen event occurred, and vice versa. On the alternately, things went really, really well because we did such a great job of planning this all out. When in the end, it's all just kind of luck, and obviously the people in the moment reacting appropriately. A lot of it is not as well choreographed as everybody plays it out to be. But that's not the story that's being told, right? Basically, that these agencies themselves maybe exist to supposedly control these events, but are they really that controllable? And what are the outcomes? Maybe this particular win that they have now, who knows what the long-term consequences of it are, right? Was this all worth it for Coyote in the long run?
There's a few ideas there.
Mhm.
And the original thing that you were talking about made me think about and actually Google while I was talking to you, fog of war, right? Because the AI tells me fog of war is a term that describes the uncertainty and complexity of military operations. And so I think that is a real thing, that there's only so much you can control in such an intense situation. You can have the best plan in the world. It can all go sideways in a second based on something unanticipated, right? Or even something you anticipated, but it just doesn't play out the way it should have. So I think there's that. And then there is the idea too, and this occurred to me at the time I was watching it, the value of Coyote, which I guess is something that is, a theme in this show, right? Of the value of everybody's life and who we're willing to write off and who we're willing to fight to get back and keep safe. Not that Samia and Coyote are the same, they are not, but you can see, Martian is pleading with people to help him with Samia, right? And everybody's mental calculus is like, no, we can't risk what we would need to risk to help this random lady that you happen to love. Like, you can see it happening in everybody's head. The gear is turning. Richard Gere, right? Gears. Like, you can see when he's offering, well, I can do this, well, I can do that. And Martian's saying none of those things are going to work. And Richard Gere is kind of like, yeah, I know. For this person and their value, this is all I can do. Whereas for Coyote, they will have an entire military operation.
And I think because there is a clear story, once again, it's just so interesting that all of these machinations are all not due to the actual value of an asset, but for the story. Samia has no story that Bosco can tell himself that is valuable. If she had been brought in as an agent, that would have been valuable because they had discovered this operation, this negotiation that was going on. And all of a sudden he could go to his higher ups and say, look, she's this valuable asset. She's an insider in this particular way. That would be a story that he could tell, even if they never needed her in the future. And therefore it would be useful. Now, at this moment, when she's a political prisoner, and not because of anything she's done for the agency, what value does it have to endanger agents to rescue her? It doesn't have any upside for them. As opposed to, same thing, what is the big upside of Coyote? Does Coyote know national secrets? It's not. It's just that he's a CIA operative, and that this could be something that would embarrass the US and potentially be used as some kind of leverage, if it's very public, to maybe pressure the Americans to be less involved in the Ukraine war, or minimally to win some kind of political points by the Russian army. So these are relatively small stakes in the grand scheme of the Ukrainian war, obviously, where hundreds and thousands of people are dying, but it matters. There's a clear storyline that they have. And that's what's kind of interesting about this show. All of these potentially multiple people will die to rescue one person, not because that person knows the secrets to potentially undoing the Ukrainian war. It's simply to save face publicly. If you make the CIA look bad, they will endanger multiple people to extract you from a situation. And you could be a good person. You could even be a valuable asset. But if they don't have any skin in the game, why are they going to risk themselves to extract you from this prison in Sudan? These things, in a way, are pretty arbitrary. What they're deciding is valuable and not valuable is pretty arbitrary. Whether these missions work out in the end are kind of arbitrary. And then even if you're successful in what you're planning on doing, the consequences of that long-term, 5 years, 10 years out, who knows if that was a good decision or not? It's all pretty much up to, history, which obviously no one can control. Speaking of the fog of war, you think about all these military actions that we've been involved in, and 5 years later, 8 years later, 10 years later, was it worth it? Did it make things better? Did it make things worse? All those things are kind of up for debate.
I agree with all of that, except I do think Coyote knows stuff.
That's true. Maybe that's why they faked they drugged him and all that. I still wonder.
Yeah, because part of it, right, was that his asset, whose name is escaping me, we haven't seen him in a few episodes now.
The other Russian guy, yeah.
Yeah, he knew about Felix, right?
Did he? I don't even know. I don't even remember that now. I'm confused.
I feel like he knew some stuff, and that's why they were so interested in protecting him and keeping him safe.
But if the Felix thing is so important, I mean, at this point, they called off the Felix assassination, which ends up happening anyway. I think I'm still a little unsure.
But I'm just giving this as an example of, like, if he
Yes.
knew that, he would know other stuff as well.
Yes. I mean, yes. But you would have assumed when they have him, they've been torturing him this time, that he has already given up all this information, because they knew everything, not everything, but I mean, it was implied earlier on, if they knew where Coyote's secret phone was in that deli, and he knew where the meetups, they called him Coyote, right? And Henry basically said, that's like the last thing you give up. So if he's given up his identity name, he's already told them everything. So if he's so valuable, they suspect he has already given up all of that information. And yet they are still endangering their lives to extract this guy. And I guess now, I'm just thinking about this now, I guess another reason to protect your CIA assets is to show to anybody else out there who could potentially turn against the Russians that we will come and get you and protect you. Because obviously, if you abandon these people, like the secretary, which once again, speaking about the story, Coyote is someone that if you abandon Coyote, other potential turncoats will know about that. You want to say, no, we'll come and get you, right?
Yeah.
The secretary was just someone they recruited in the last minute. And when she dies, no one's going to think it's related to any spying she was doing. So it's okay if she dies because she's not important to us, basically.
Poor thing.
Yeah, unfortunately, the case here. I mean, everything's transactional in the end, right? And then once again, that's what is kind of interesting about the Richardson character. I mean, I'm sure there are things to him that are also valuable emotionally to him. And maybe he'll become a bigger part, I assume, in later seasons of the show. But at this moment, he is purely transactional and he is willing to burn anyone around him to get his way. And of course, that's part of the reason that Martian is so angry at him. But very bad choice of, speaking of other things, other mistakes Martian might have made, maybe having Richardson in his confidence at all early on was a big mistake. So what do you think about Danny being codenamed Gremlin?
I decided this year that Gremlins is my favorite Christmas movie.
Yes, agreed.
It makes me think of Mogwai and how cute Mogwai is and what they turn into. I don't blame her for not liking that code name. I wouldn't care for it either.
Maybe she is cute like a Mogwai, and she
can turn into a gremlin. I mean, it might be very apropos.
She's kind of cute, and she does have a little bit of a Mogwai look to her.
Yeah, I get it.
Oh, by the way, something I forgot to bring up. I tried to watch American Primeval. Just kind of apropos of absolutely nothing. I'm going to throw this in here.
I don't even know what that is.
It's the number one show on TV right now. Well, it's on Netflix, which I mean, a lot of times.
I haven't come out from under my rock in a few weeks, I guess.
It is one of those things that it's the number one show, but it's on Netflix. So I mean, not for nothing, but because Netflix has such a huge effect on what people are watching, whatever's number one on Netflix is the most popular thing at that moment. And I got to say, a lot of those things go right past me as well. I did want to sample it because I found the premise of it intriguing, is about the settling of the West, and the villains in it are the Mormons. What's his name? Brigham Young. So he is the villain of the piece, and
I see.
Anyway, so I thought this would be intriguing in a way. I could not get into it. It is like it's funny. It's trying to replace a certain mythology about the West with another mythology of the West, which makes the whole thing look like it's like an episode of The Walking Dead. It's like just pure miserableism. And I don't believe that if 99% of everybody who went out West died on the way, that they would keep going. I just don't buy this mythology of this show. But I did want to bring it up just for the fact that I did not know this, but the actress that plays Danny is also one of the stars of that show. So anyway, just seeing her in there as well.
I was wondering how that was going to tie back. Okay, gotcha.
It was a long way to go around, but I did want to throw a mini review in there that I didn't really like it. It basically is a horror film. So if you like horror and you want to see the most horrific version of the Western migration, then watch that show. I think it's not really something I wanted to spend much time with. Anyway, the reason I brought it up was because surprised to find out that the same actress is there. I have not seen this actress before, and all of a sudden seeing her in two things at the same time, I was kind of surprised. But she's very good in that as well. So anyway, and maybe indeed she's a gremlin.
I mean, what a wild movie Gremlins is. Just as an aside, it really is an unhinged movie.
It's great. You would never make a movie like that nowadays. Rated PG, no less. It's just nuts, but it's so good. So when we get to the end of the episode, there are two basic parallel things happening. We have to talk about how things land with Danny and what you think that means for season 2. And of course, the final moments with Martian. Let's start with Danny first. So she comes out of the airport. She emails Naomi. Naomi's obviously relieved. She meets with Reza. Reza goes, I tried to get you out of there as quickly as possible. He really seems apologetic about the whole situation. If he truly believes that she's just a student, this is a horrible experience to put her through. But that moment when she says to him, I'm in Tehran, and he's like, yeah, of course. And that smile on her face once again. How do you read those final moments?
I thought she felt, she had accomplished something just by making it there. And she's looking forward to the next part of her mission. How did you read it?
I agree. I had read that she was concerned last week when she was on the plane. I had read that as her being like, do I really want this? There was also a moment earlier on when Naomi or somebody was asking her, do you really want to go to Tehran? And she's like, yes, like more than anything, that's basically was her goal. It seems like maybe the nervousness we saw at the end of last week was more to do with her worrying that it wouldn't work out, because she seems to have really come out of that questioning and not been like, wow, I shouldn't have done this. She seems to be like, I made it. So it's this strange competitiveness that we've seen in her multiple times that I think is indicative of her personality. I'm wondering whether it is trying to say that this is a good personality asset for her as an agent or a bad one. Do you have a particular feel on that?
I don't get the feeling that she was born to do this. Okay. Yeah. I think it's going to be a little bit of a rough introduction for her, but I do think she has the passion for it and the commitment to it to be good at it. And I think that's part of why they're showing us this. There are some bumps ahead for her. I don't think it would be as interesting if she was born to do this and took to it like a natural. So I think that's kind of the point of her storyline, is seeing somebody at the beginning of their career doing this, learning what it entails.
What's interesting to me about it, and I've thought about this multiple times over the course of the season, there's something about Danny where she is almost like an athlete. Like she's saying, like, can I do this? Can I run a marathon? And so much of being able to do that is to psychologically be able to do it, right? More than physically be able to do it. And I do feel like she is that type of student overachiever in a way, right? But what's interesting, the reason I asked that question, though, to you is because do you think that that is what the CIA is actually looking for in an agent? Like maybe the question I have for you more clearly is, if you were going to recruit someone to be an agent, what would be those qualities? Would it be someone who's going to try really hard, or would it be someone who innately is deceptive, or what would be your criteria? And in that case, maybe it circles back to why you feel that maybe she's not really equipped for this job.
It's such an interesting question, and it's one I haven't really thought about before. If I wanted to hire a CIA agent, I would want somebody that's a good poker player, somebody inscrutable,
Yep.
and somebody that's a good chess player, always seeing several moves ahead.
What you just said is really adept. Chess is all strategy with very rigid rules, but you need to improvise, right? Like there's an infinite number of chess moves, right? Exactly. But then also poker player is really important, because with poker, it's not about the complexity of the game. It's reading your opponent. For example, do I cry in front of this guy, or do I act tough as nails in front of this guy? That is more important than anything else in that moment. I think the poker player is a really good metaphor to throw in there. Maybe that's the most important thing, is being able to read the person in front of you correctly in those circumstances, right?
So do you think she's a good poker player?
Exactly. That's my question. The exact same question.
I don't know the answer to that yet.
I don't know either. I don't think I know her well enough. I don't know. I don't think she's ready to be in the field, not because she's a bad agent, but because I don't know if she knows if she's a good poker player or not. Given the limited evidence we have here, I don't think she has enough experience, right? You have to play a lot of hands of poker.
It's true. A lot of that is experience. Yes.
Right. And now she's trying to infiltrate the Iranian nuclear program.
Yeah.
the way they outlined this, her mission at the start would be that she's relatively well protected because she would be in there as a student within an academic organization, more so inside of a bubble. But inevitably, she's going to have to exit that bubble to, get some kind of valuable information. I don't know if they vetted her properly for this. Getting your phone number from somebody at the restaurant was not enough of an experience for her.
Oh, I forgot about that scene. Yeah.
Oh, and then of course, Martian returns to the office. He's all beat up. Blake gives him a serious stink eye there as he walks past her. That look on her face, that usual look on her face, that actress can pull off that look like nobody else. That smirk and questioning and concern all at the same time. And yeah, then we see that final like terrified look on Martian's face. Do you have any kind of read why he feels, you read all that fear and stress on his face there in those final moments? Like you mentioned, I don't really feel like the UK would be such a nefarious, it's not like the Russians have infiltrated him. He could potentially end up locked up for the rest of his life or worse, if that's the case. What do you think his overall concern is there, if you can get a read on any of that?
We've been talking about throughout this show what compels a person to get into this line of work. And one of our theories was patriotism, right? That you really do love your country and want to serve your country. We've seen before when Osman said, Samia could be fine. Just give me the list of names of the people that you talk to in Ethiopia. He didn't do it because he's loyal to his country, I assume. I think regardless of the actual consequence of being this kind of double agent, which again, I'm not sure I'm completely grasping it because it seems very strange to me, you still are doing something that is disloyal to your country. I think there is that conflict regardless of what the practical consequences are. This isn't what you asked, but I feel like enough time has elapsed that we should have gotten a Samia update by the end of this episode, and we didn't.
Yeah. I understand why they didn't do it, for the fact that we are in the blind as well with him. They don't want to kill her off because, and once again, I don't know the French show, so I don't know if she comes back at some later point. I actually think that would be fascinating. I think we mentioned earlier that we'd be curious to see her potentially resurface much later in the storyline. That would be interesting if we jump ahead at some point, like a year or so or more. He assumes she's either locked up or dead, even potentially. And then they do cross paths again. And then he thinks, wait a second, is she manipulating me? Is she an agent now? How did she get out of that circumstance? So then they could be, in a way, because they can both be lying to each other, they're more on an even ground at that point. So it could be a more interesting way to get to know each other sincerely, considering Paul was not true, not a real person, right? That she supposedly fell in love with back when she met him. All of that is potentially intriguing. I don't know how they use this character or the corollary character in the French show. So all remains to be seen. If they bring her back as just like someone to be rescued later the next season, I don't really care, to be honest.
Despite their best attempts, I have not gotten attached to her.
Yes.
I will miss her wardrobe, but
yes.
Yeah.
She wasn't a monochromatic outfit, even when she was in prison. So,
well, they just took her from wherever she was, so it's not like that was her prison
that's
outfit.
True. She might have like an orange
issued to her. I don't think.
We don't know what they wear at the prison.
We don't know. That's fair.
Did you have anything else you wanted to touch on? Anything I forgot?
No specific details, but I will say I really think they landed the plane on this one. Like, I really like how this all played out. I really enjoyed this last episode. I thought it was a well-constructed story. I think they kept it moving. Sometimes there are certain episodes where you're like, oh, this one was kind of a dud. I didn't really feel like any of them were just filling time. I liked everybody's acting. I think there was a lot to like and enjoy about this show.
Yeah, I like this show very much as well. I thought it was really well written. I thought the characters really well defined. I thought the central romance didn't work as well, but that's not the first time that particular thing hasn't worked for me in these shows. But in general, I really like how they set up all these characters. I really do feel like they're trying to set up a long-term office set drama to, in a way, even though it's set in this very high stakes type of circumstances. And yeah, I thought it was very well paced. Like you said, I know some people thought this was slow. I didn't find it slow at all, and always intriguing and smart in the way it addressed some of these themes as well. All right, so Sona, we will be touching base this weekend at some point once you catch up on
Yep.
Severance episode 2. Can't wait to. I watched this appointment TV with me and my wife. The
Yeah,
only thing we watched together.
You make me
So,
feel like I need to go watch it right after we hang up, actually.
oh, if you have time, you should. It's really exciting. And meanwhile, here on the feed, Darren and I are still waiting for something we can watch together. I had actually mentioned last week that we were going to, and we did record something about it. We were going to watch this show, Prime Target, on Apple TV Plus. Have you seen the trailer for this at all?
I don't think so. Tell me a little bit about it.
They've run it before Severance. It just started this week. It is a conspiracy thriller with Leo Woodall from The White Lotus season 2. He was also the lead in that One Day show we watched on Netflix together.
Yeah.
He's like a math prodigy, and there's some kind of conspiracy where
I don't think I know about this show.
Anyway, because it was a conspiracy thriller and because it had CIA operatives in it and, it was tangential to espionage, I thought it'd be a good fit for us to continue the conversation after The Agency. Anyway, we watched the first 2 episodes and we really did not like the show.
Oh, shoot.
So we will not be watching that show as our next watch, but we are trying. And Sona, you might like this one. Did you ever watch?
A few episodes. I didn't see it all the way through.
The creator of that show has a completely different type of show coming out on Hulu next week, where Sterling K. Brown stars as a Secret Service agent. And there's a town called Paradise. And apparently all these very important people live there, retire there once they're no longer in the public eye, like former presidents. And what happens is that one of the presidents, played by James Marsden, who's retired there, has all of the secrets that the CIA and all of these have been collected throughout the history of American history. Like he has a box that has all of these secrets in it. And someone ends up dead at this town, and the secrets could come out. And who is the murderer? Conspiracy thriller, yet another one, premiering next week on Hulu. So we are going now to try that as our next watch along. So I will let you know. I'll check in next week. And
that sounds interesting.
It does, right? You may actually want to watch that too. So I'll give you the thumbs up, thumbs down on that next week, and we'll publish an episode about it, hopefully. And we will also keep discussing Severance, another conspiracy thriller. So maybe we'll have 2 conspiracy thrillers to ping pong between for the next.
There's more than enough conspiracies to go around.
So many. There's even more coming down the pike. So if this one doesn't work out, there'll be another one in a couple of weeks to discuss anyway. So, but that is now our new plan, is to watch Paradise now that The Agency is no longer on the agenda. And Sona, I'll let you know what we thought of the first 3 episodes actually premiering. Feel free to watch it. It comes out on a Tuesday. If you're light on the watch, maybe you should check that out as well. And if so, maybe we'll touch base
on Hulu. You said
Hulu, yes.
I find Sterling K. Brown very likable.
Yeah, I loved him in what was that movie he just got an Academy Award nomination for with Henry here with Jeffrey Wright.
Oh, American Fiction. That was a good movie. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very entertaining in that.
I actually saw that one. It was good.
Yeah, I know you did. We haven't discussed it, but I really like that movie as well.
I think I saw it on a plane, which is the main time that I
a lot of people watch movies on planes
when I'm a captive, and there's just nothing else
when you
to
can
do.
Have a chance to. All right, so we will continue going week to week with Severance and possibly with Paradise as well. And if not, then we'll just keep looking for something else.
There's so much stuff coming up.
There is a lot of stuff coming
right?
out. So will definitely be something to watch. All right. Thanks again for the conversation.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.